Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the HGLRC Mefisto. This is a bind and fly 5-inch race copter and it's the 5 to 6S version. You can also get it as a 4 to 5S version, but I thought it would be interesting to check out the 6S version because I think a race copter benefits more from a 6S battery than say a freestyle copter. For example, I flew the Eachine Wizard X220 HV and that is a 6S freestyle copter, and when it wasn't doing its death rolls I would go up on the throttle and I could hear and feel a voltage sag, and I think that is just because it is a heavier copter and it doesn't benefit as much from a 6S battery, whereas the race copter is lighter. The idea is that the 6S battery will draw less current and you'll get less voltage sag, and the way that they usually run these races is that you have to do as many laps as possible within 2 minutes, and if you are running a 4S setup, what can happen is at the end of that 2 minutes you have to come off the throttle because your battery has sagged to the point where if you go up on the throttle anymore the thing will just fall out of the sky and you might not complete the 2 minutes, whereas with 6S you won't get the voltage sag. You might be able to get more laps in because you can stay on the throttle and you can complete the 2 minutes. That is the theory anyways. So this is a bind and fly, as I mentioned, so let's take a look at the specifications. It weighs 320 grams and it comes like this. All I've had to do is install these propellers and screw on this pagoda antenna. Everything else comes completely built. So the motors are the Flame brand by HGLRC. They are a 2207 and they are a 1775 kV, which I think is the equivalent on a 4S to a 2350 kV or around about that, so fairly low kV really when you convert it to 6S, so we'll have to see how it flies. The props are the Gemfan Flash 5152S, so heavy in pitch, and if you ever pay attention to the description of my YouTube videos, I list my favorite race copter as the Batman 220, so we'll have to see if this replaces it. Now I know the Emax Hawk 5 is a very popular model, but I think it's aging a little bit now, and both of these copters have got more updated components. For example, we've got 32-bit ESCs here and they are 60 amp. Now it doesn't have telemetry, but we have a F4 flight controller up here, and then we have got the VTX up here as well. It's actually a different VTX to the Batman, so they call this the F60 Titan stack. But this VTX here, it only goes up to 400 milliwatt, whereas I think this one goes up to 600 milliwatt, which is interesting because this one is more expensive, but that might be because of the camera. The Batman weighs 302 grams, which is lighter than the Mefisto. What I thought was unusual about the Batman was the pitch of props that they provided in the package. They were a very low pitch prop. I think they were a 5042. And this is a race copter, and a 5042 prop is more of a freestyle prop, so this can have a much heavier pitch prop, and I fitted the Gemfan 5152S props and it flew a lot faster with those propellers. So the VTX is a switching VTX. Now unfortunately I did pretty much have to do a full setup in Betaflight, and this guy's actually been out for quite a while, so I flashed the latest version of Betaflight and did a full setup. So if you are buying this guy now, then you are going to have to be accustomed to Betaflight and do a full setup. But it did come with the XM Plus nicely secured so that I could bind it easily. You do have to plug a battery in order to do that, and it also had these cable ties and heat shrink on the top. The XM Plus came flash with the FCC version of the firmware, but unfortunately not the RSSI firmware, which I think is a little bit lazy. I think that's easy to do, so they've just taken it out of the package and installed it. I think they could have gone the extra mile, especially for the premium price, to stick the RSSI firmware on there. So the battery that I'm going to be using is this Tattoo R-Line 1050 mAh 6S, and it's got a watt-hour equivalent of about a 1500 mAh 4S. The Pagoda antenna is SMA, but they have not given the credit, which I think is a little bit naughty, but there you go. What I like about these motors is they've got this lip on them here, so they are a naked bottom, but the lip stops the heat shrink here of the wires getting in the way of the bell of the motor. That's something that they also did on the Batman, and I really liked it. The motors also have a hollow shaft, but if we look underneath here, we have got a C-clip rather than a hex driver, so that's a bit of a shame. A hex driver is so much easier to take the bell off if you get it caked in mud, which this time of year is happening a lot, and we just have the 3 screws there connecting the frame to the motor. So we've got a Runcam Swift 2 here, and it has got a 2.1mm lens. One thing that did disappoint me though is that they had left the on-screen display on there when the flight controller's got its own on-screen display, and they don't give you the controller to turn it off. A lot of companies are doing that, and it's really annoying. So I have a controller from previous models, so I was able to turn that off. But if you don't have one of those, then you're going to have to buy one separately. Now, another thing about the camera is that it's at quite a high angle, and you don't have much wiggle room because they have these 2 screws in here. What you can do though is remove this screw completely, and then you can have a more flatter angle. But if you wanted to put a GoPro on the top there, then you'd have to stick with the angle of the frame here, whereas with the Batman we have a flat top, so you could choose whatever angle you liked. But I guess this guy is designed to run without a GoPro, especially where they have mounted the antennas as well. Another complaint I have is that you have to fit the battery strap yourself, and these wires are really thick and it's quite difficult to feed it through, so I had to use a pair of tweezers and I managed to push it through. But we do have a silicone battery mat already installed underneath. Now, something that's interesting about this model is the low ESR capacitor that they have added. It is a 1000 microfarad, but it's only rated to 35 volts. Now, the reason they add these capacitors to these 4-in-1 ESCs is because there is not enough room for the filtration on the board itself. And usually you want to go double the voltage of the battery, because the reason for having them is to deal with voltage spikes, which can quite often be double the voltage of the battery that you are using. That might not be a problem though if there is enough filtering on this board in the first place, and I imagine there probably is, because it's the same board that was on the Batman and there was no noise coming through on there whatsoever. But these low ESR capacitors are designed to explode. That's what these are here, so hopefully that won't be happening, but we'll have to check out the heat of this guy when I'm doing the flight. Now the frame is a stretched X, and one of the concerns I usually have with a configuration like this is when one of the screws goes through the arm and also the stack, because what can happen is vibrations from the motor can go down the arm, up through the screw and into the stack. But this is soft mounted here, and these motors are very good quality, so I'm not expecting any issues. And that was the case with the Batman. However, as you can see with the Batman, the stack is not connected to the arm, so we'll have to see if we get any mid yaw throttle oscillations, because that is usually what causes that. So let's see what else you get in the package. We've got just 2 spare propellers here, and then we've got a bunch of spare screws. Now I think these are just the screws that come with the motors and are designed for 5mm arms, because these are 4mm arms. The reason I think that is the nuts will in all of these packages, and when you get motors then they usually put the nuts in these bags, but I don't know, maybe you can reuse them. We have got some stickers here, and we've also got the XM Plus manual. We've got a quality control pass, and then we've got kind of a instruction manual, but you are going to need to be accustomed to Betaflight to get this guy going, because it pretty much needed a full setup from my point of view. So these are the PIDs that I settled on. I upgraded Betaflight to version 3.55 because the version that came with the Copter was just too old, so I didn't get a chance to check out their PIDs, but the stock Betaflight PIDs were causing oscillations, so I had to change them to this. So you are welcome to copy them if you like, and we have some DVR footage, and the video is squeaky clean, and I'd expect nothing less from HGLRC. So I've got my speed meter set up. Let's see what figure we get, and I messed it up straight away. Did you see the Copter started veering towards the ground? But we still got 96 miles per hour. By the way, it's about 9 o'clock in the morning here, and we have a headwind of about 8 miles per hour, so I do think that this Copter could go a little bit quicker than this. But let's have a look what it does this time. So we've got 103 miles per hour, and it pretty much consistently got that speed every single time. Now what I tried to do with this is change the distance between the speed meter from when I accelerated, because what you quite often get on a 4S battery is a burst of speed. So if I'm close to the speed meter and then do full throttle, it will quite often read a high speed, but then if I pull back from the meter and do full throttle, you get a slower speed because the battery has sagged. So here I'm really far back from the speed meter and I'm getting 103 miles per hour, and that is the idea of 6S. Although I have to say I was still noticing voltage sag. I could feel it and I could hear it. Now I know in a race that you are not going to be on full throttle as much as I'm doing here, but yeah, there was still voltage sag. But yeah, what I did is I did some different tests. So I tried doing full throttle further back from the speed meter and then close to the speed meter, and each time the results were pretty much the same. So again, we are far away from the meter here, and we've got 102 miles per hour. Alright, we lost 1 mile per hour, but you know, the battery is depleting at this point. That was something else that was difficult as well, to know when to land, because technically I was above 3.3 volts, so I carried on flying, but I had to back out of one of the speed runs, and you will see that because I could hear that I was not getting the same amount of power. So another speed run there, 103 miles per hour. You can see that is pretty consistent. Now the day before this we had gusts of winds of about 50 miles per hour, and I took this guy out, and it was also a downwind, so the opposite of today, and I got a crazy speed out of that, so you'll see that a little bit later. But yeah, I went for 3 minutes for the voltage because, as I say, it didn't work the same as a 4S. I started losing power way before the voltage you would expect for a 4S, so that was where I actually had to pull out of the speed run. But you can see 20 volts there, it's above 3.3 volts per cell, so yeah, a little bit strange. That acts a little bit different to a 4S in terms of when you should be landing. But anyways, yes, this was the very windy day, and it was even blowing the GoPro that was filming it. But check this out, 120 mile per hour, but of course that has been helped with the wind. So there you go, that is my review of the HGLRC Mefisto. The only downsides, I think, is the camera and the fact that it's quite difficult to put the battery strap through. The battery strap isn't of a good quality either, so I actually ended up switching it out for a grippy one because it didn't have rubber on it and the battery was sliding, I noticed, so I switched that out as well. One thing I noticed is that the voltage scaling was slightly out. I think I had to go up 2 points in the settings to get that correct. The current meter is also out as well, and that's a little bit more difficult to explain how to calibrate, so I would suggest that you YouTube that, because you have to have a charger that will show you how many milliamps went back into that battery and adjust the scaling. But I think it's definitely incorrect here, but only by a small amount. And I know a lot of racers as well, they're going to be building their own setup. And as for 6S, I'm still on the fence. I'm sure if you are a racer, then it's important to you, but it's not really that important to me. And I think for freestyle, it's not necessary. However, everything is becoming 6S, so I think just like when they upgrade Android or Windows or YouTube, you just have to go with the flow. So I imagine at some point we'll probably all be flying 6S and maybe even higher. But until then, I will link this model in the below, and if you can afford to do so, then I'll also link to my Patreon. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.